Wow, never thought when we were struggling to cross that this day would come. But first of all, I'd like to thank God for being here. I am Catherine Coleman Flowers. I'm from Lowndes County, Alabama. That's where I may start out because I want people to know that, you know, you can be a country girl, growing up poor, living with an outhouse, and become a MacArthur Genius Fellow. And I often, especially for young people that are in the room, I often say, and I recently gave a commencement speech at Alabama State University, and there one of the things I talked about that I would say here as well, is not where you start, it's where you finish. So today, I'd like to talk about some of the things that have got me to where I am and where I think that my journey is really just starting. I don't think it's all over yet. But I would like for some of you to join me on that journey as we talk about environmental and climate justice and what we need to do to make sure that there's a livable world for 7 generations to come. So first I'd like to thank Dr. Austin, who was my line sister many years ago, and now to be here at AUM, the school that I remember when AUM came about. If you know anything about my history, I was one of the plaintiffs in the Knight case. The Knight case was filed many years ago because there was a plan underway to separate AUM from Auburn and turn it into the University of Montgomery and merge Alabama State University, the HBCU, under AUM. And I started out as a student activist in high school, but also in college, and joined the Knight case as a student plaintiff to preserve the history of Alabama State University, because I felt that in order for this city and for the educational system in Alabama to be rich, both heritage were very important. Not to eliminate one in order to preserve the other. And to this day now we have Alabama State University and AUM both coexisting here in the city of Montgomery. So it is an honor for me to be here, and to be here with such a diverse crowd celebrating Juneteenth. And you know, if we look at the news today and what is being talked about in the media about eliminating the very history that makes Montgomery an important city, I think it's important to have these kinds of commemorations, but also for you to be here to acknowledge it. Because people outside of the South, when they see the news, they wonder what's going on. But they don't see this. They don't see the type of gathering that I see here this morning that's taking place. And I would really like to encourage some of you to consider writing an editorial to talk about these kinds of experiences so people can know that the South is diverse, that we're not going back, that we're actually moving forward. And there are people here that are still, although we may change the name of these programs and call them something else, we're still about having the kind of experiences that could benefit all of us, because only that way is America going to be stronger. But my experience, again, starts in Lowndes County, Alabama, at a school that was called Lowndes County Training School at the time I was in school. And the reason why it was training school was that the black kids went to the training school and the white kids went to Lowndes County High School. And I remember telling my age, which I'm proud of, I remember when I went to spend the summer in Washington, D.C., the summer of 1975, I was an intern at the Robert Kennedy Memorial Foundation, and there they had me learning about Capitol Hill and how it functioned. Something I was learning at 15, 16 that apparently some people didn't understand when they went and tried to take over the Capitol, but I had the opportunity to learn at 15 and 16 how government really functions and the purpose of the U.S. Capitol. So while I was there, I had a chance to visit Senator Kennedy. And Senator Kennedy started asking me questions about my school. And he said, why is your school a training school? He said, because outside of the South, the training school denotes schools of detention. Schools for children that, well, back when I was growing up, when you were bad, they said they're going to send you to Mount Meigs. And that was the equivalent of my high school outside of the South. So because of that, I came back home and I fought with my parents and some board members to change the name of the school to Central High School. And when I graduated from high school in 1976, my high school diploma said Central High School and not Lowndes County Training School. And that was the beginning of my growth. And what I learned as a country girl, I learned a lot of things that, that I use now in the environmental movement. A lot of people think this is new. But if your parents grew up in the country, they had a garden, they may have had some chickens and some pigs, and if they had a little money, they may have had a cow or two. All of these things you learn about planting and when to plant and when you're not supposed to plant. And you don't plant, you have to plant after that frost, because the frost is going to come and kill your plants. And we learned about, at that time, we didn't have the Weather Channel. We had, Poor Richard's Almanac that people use in order to learn when to plant. So all of those things now, when I look back and I didn't know that, I would eventually meet Al Gore at the Climate Reality Board that I serve on. The Climate Reality Project was founded by Al Gore. And when I saw An Inconvenient Truth many years ago, I was like, he's talking about the things I learned when I was growing up in Lowndes County. And I think that the natural environmentalists in this country are country folk. Those of us, thank you, those of us that grew up in the country and had to learn how to live with our environment. We couldn't run to the store every day. It wasn't like that. They killed they slaughtered an animal. Everybody in the neighborhood benefited from it, because I remember my dad killed a cow. Everybody in Black Belt was over there to get some, to take it home. But at the same time, we had a deep freezer because we could freeze our food, because we couldn't go to the store. There was no grocery store. There was no Publix. There was no Walmart at the time that you could go to. People would grow their food and they would freeze it. And one of the memories that I have is sitting on the porch, picking peas and stuff, the things that our children know nothing about, or how to cut up a chicken. Because when I grew up, we had one chicken, and that chicken fed the whole family. Now you go to the grocery store, the chicken could come from several different chickens. That didn't happen when we were growing up. So those are the things that we learned, the things that I think that we're going to have to, some of the values we're going to have to go back to. Because when they talk about food deserts, we didn't have food deserts because we had gardens. And even in West Montgomery, my family that lived in West Montgomery, they had gardens. Because if there was a patch of ground there, they would have used it and plant seeds in it. So we have to, as I learned about environmental justice, and I learned about climate change, all of those lessons I got when I was growing up, I apply them now. As time went on, I started learning about, when I came back, I was a teacher, and I taught in Washington, D.C. And when I was teaching in D.C., all of my friends, I taught in a school that had, it was like an open classroom concept. In other words, there were no walls. So it's hard to teach there. You got to pay attention. The students have to be able to pay attention because you can see everybody on the entire floor. And what I would always do, because people from Montgomery were always visiting D.C., I would let them come and speak to my, students. And ultimately, as time went on, a lot of people that I would invite there eventually came to be people that were prominent here in the city of Montgomery. But also my students learned about the history here. And during the 25th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery March, my claim to fame as a social studies teacher was I brought my students, they were junior high school students, who actually came here. We came here, stopped in Tuskegee, and eventually stopped in Montgomery and went on to Selma, and they marched from Selma to Montgomery as young people. And a lot of those students are now in prominent positions, and one of the things they look back to is the history that inspired them here. This is a very powerful place. Montgomery, no matter where I go in the world, the two things that people talk to me about, they know about Montgomery, and some people learned about Lowndes County. You know, I was in, I just joined the board of the Rocky Mountain Institute, which is located in Basalt, Colorado. And James and I were in Washington. And the head of the Rocky Mountain Institute said to me, Catherine, I was on the plane and I saw they're showing this film on the plane called Lowndes County and the Fight for Black Power. It's actually about, Lowndes County's history is about voting rights. When people didn't have the right to vote in Lowndes County, they wouldn't allow them to register as Democrats or Republicans, they formed their own party, which is the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, and they took as their emblem the Black Panther, because a lot of people didn't know how to read and write. So they chose something that people could remember when they went to the polls, and that was the Panther. And later, of course, the Panther became associated with a group in Oakland, but it was actually founded in Lowndes County as a political party. But a lot of people know about Lowndes County's history now, and again, I'm saying all this because we're at a place of higher learning, and you are fortunate to be here, because these are things that we can use to not only, I think, to help young people grow and learn and preserve democracy, but I think it's also important to know the space and place in which you're in now, and to be able to tell those stories, because I've met a number of people here today who are from Montgomery. And I'm old school. Whenever I meet somebody, I want to know where you're from. Then the next thing I might want to ask you is, who your folk? Okay. You know, that's from the country. You know, I used to say to my parents, I used to tell my father was an only child. I used to tell Dad, Daddy, how do you have so many cousins? But I've since learned after taking the DNA test that that's true, that he did have a lot of cousins. And I'm finding out that some of these cousins on both my mother and father's side are also connected, because my mother was from one side of the river in Autauga County, and my father was from the other side of the river in Lowndes County, and they all end up in Montgomery. So those are things that I've learned, and it's been very, very powerful in terms of my journey. And there are a few lessons that I've learned. One, always acknowledge where you're from. Never be ashamed of where you're from. You know, when I grew up, although there was all these political things that were going on around the world, and even in the state of Alabama, my neighbors, our neighbors in our communities were still our neighbors, whether they were black or white. If your house burned down, everybody was coming. If somebody died, somebody was going to bring a plate or something, food, or come to the funeral. Those were the things that happened. And I think that we're at a time in America that we need to remember those things. And we shouldn't let people divide us and make us think that one is better than the other. Because one of the things that I learned with Reverend William Barber in the Poor People's Campaign, I went through Appalachia. We actually flew into Pittsburgh and took it was almost like Thelma and Louise, because I was with two activists. One was Danae, she was black, and Danae, which is Navajo, and the other one was a white activist from Boston. And we actually drove through part of Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee. And going through Appalachia, I met a lot of people that were white, that looked like to me it looked like Lowndes County, just the people were white. And one of the things that I learned from that is that we don't acknowledge poor people enough in this country. A lot of us don't want people to know where we came from. I think it's a blessing to have come from where we've come from and to be where we are right now. And the only way I think that how we can inspire other people is to share our stories. And I told them when I was going through there, looking at the mountaintop removal, I mean, who in the world would, West Virginia is a beautiful state. But how people have come in and defiled the state, blowing the tops off mountains to get to a vein of coal makes no sense to me. And there are so many families that we met where there are family members that only wanted to work a decent job and working in those coal mines and having black lung disease so they can put their kids through school. But things are changing, and we need to be a part of that change. And I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. But in West Virginia, what I've learned, one of the other lessons that I've learned, that we are more alike than we are different. And we need to acknowledge that. Then the third thing that I've learned is that we never stop learning. No matter how old I get, I still learn something new. I try to learn something new. I learned new things from my grandson who's 8 years old. I'm probably going to learn something new from my granddaughter who's a year old. You have to always keep learning. I thought when I was younger I wanted to write a book. I never thought that I would be older when I finally wrote that book. And I encountered a situation that I talk about a lot was when I was actually here in Montgomery, because I was living in Montgomery until 2021. And I was traveling a lot. I had started the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice. My organization was actually born out of the work that I'm doing in Lowndes County. And we started off first as the Alabama Center for Rural Enterprise, and then we evolved into the center. And a lot of that I have to give credit to Brian Stevenson, the Equal Justice Initiative, because when times were hard, it was Brian that called me and gave me a job where I could continue to do the work that I'm now being recognized for. But it was during that time, in 2020, we had been doing all this work and had started our organization. We even brought Jane Fonda to Montgomery and to Lowndes County. Jane Fonda was down in Lowndes County serving food in a country restaurant. We were in Haynesville. We had been all over Lowndes County, been all to some of the places that I'm sure Jane had never been to. And when we finally got to the restaurant, they weren't expecting us because I showed up with all these people. So they had to cook the food. And Jane had disappeared. The next thing we know, Jane was coming out with a tray and serving drinks and everything. And I was thinking, people would never believe that Jane Fonda was in Lowndes County serving food to people. But that was part of the experience that I had then. But it changed in early 2020 because I went to a hospital here, not the one near us, and the doctor cut the vein to my spleen and sent me home and didn't tell me he had done that. And then it was several days later I went back to the hospital when I found out that that was the case and my spleen was dying inside of me. And I had to undergo a second surgery to get it removed. And that was just prior to the governor shutting down the state of Alabama because of COVID. So here I was battling, trying to determine what his life is going to be like without a spleen, which is, you know, is part of your immune system, and fighting disease. And here's this disease that we had never heard of before, and there's a pandemic going on at the same time. So I ended up spending part of that year indoors, never going out, even after I was let out of the hospital. I really couldn't go to the doctor because they were afraid that I would get infected, and there were people dying all around us at that time. But there is a God. So the first miracle was the call that I received from Senator Bernie Sanders, who had visited Lowndes County the year before and said, I promised you I was going to bring help, so I'm bringing help. He said that we are forming a Biden, he said, I'm withdrawing from the race, and we're forming a Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force. And he said that on this task force is going to be headed by John Kerry and AOC. And we want you to talk about environmental justice. He said, I want you to bring it. And I ended up being appointed to that task force. And then the second thing that happened after being appointed to the task force was in October of that year, I received a phone call telling me that I had won the MacArthur Award. I didn't expect that. And all of this is happening against the backdrop of me not even being able to leave my house. When I was serving on that task force, I was doing it virtually through Zoom. Everybody was on Zoom at that particular time. But those are the kinds of things that let me know that there is a God. And no matter where we go and how much education we have, we should always count on our faith. Because it would get us through those times that are very, very hard. And for me, it was very, very hard then. But then there was those glimmers of hope that continued to happen. Also in November of that year, my first book came out, Waste, One Woman's Fight Against America's Dirty Secret. And I received a notice that the Smithsonian had designated the book as one of the most important science books of the year. These are things that I did not expect to happen. Then, of course, President Biden was elected. And then I got a call, actually the first call I got offered me the position working with USDA. They offered me a position there, and I told them, no, I'm better in the streets than I am working in Washington. I said, I need to be somebody that can go out in the country and knock on people's doors. I won't be able to do that in USDA. So they offered me another position. They said, well, what about an advisory position? And when they formed the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, I was told that I was selected to be one of the co-vice chairpersons. So that was, again, one of those moments. Here I am from Lowndes County, Alabama, and I'm serving as an advisor to the president on environmental justice. And from there, things just started to happen, one by one. I got invited to go to Edinburgh in Scotland. Always wanted to go there. Realized the similarities between the foods over there, the tea cakes that my aunts used to bake over in Auburn County. It looked like some of the same cakes they were baking over here in Scotland. And I had the opportunity to go and see the Edinburgh Castle. That's almost 1,000 years old. And made me wonder why we can't build a house here that lasts more than 20 or 30 years. You know, where they were using ways in which to treat wastewater back then in those castles. And we have a septic tank now that can't survive a rainstorm. But they make people get them anyway. And it was through those experiences that helped me to know that we can do things better. And my work around environmental justice has been around sanitation. And now I live in Huntsville, in the Huntsville area. I decided to move to Huntsville because I was thinking, you know, they got to do something in outer space with wastewater. Because the astronauts still use the bathroom up there. What do they do with it? And as God would have it, I was on 60 Minutes that year. I had just moved to Huntsville. My neighbor, who lived a few houses up the street from me, got my package, and I got hers. But she found me on Facebook and sent me a message and told me that she had my package. And she also told me, but I also saw 60 Minutes. She said, I'm from Mississippi, and I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing, and whatever I can do to help you. And I said, well, I moved to Huntsville because I want to meet people with NASA, because I want to work with them on finding a solution to the wastewater problem. And she said to me, I work for NASA headquarters. And what I did know is that a lot of people in Huntsville, you know, there are direct flights between, like from here to Montgomery, but there are direct flights between here and Huntsville. I mean, between Huntsville and DC. And she was going back and forth to DC. And she set up the meetings. with the people that we're currently working with. And one of the companies that we recently developed a relationship with has the contract to develop the lunar habitat when they land on the moon. And guess what? They got to figure out how to deal with wastewater. So I'm saying all this to say that I was able to take the ingenuity from growing up in the country and now to be able to talk with engineers and scientists that are sending people into outer space. It doesn't matter where you start, it's where you end. And a lot of the experiences that we have learned, we think that they're not valuable, that we can't use them somewhere else. I just try to still use common sense. And the last thing I will leave you with before I start taking questions is how, one of the things that I always try to do, no matter how much education I get, no matter how many accolades I get, how many students I teach at Duke, what matters to me most is I have to remain humble. It doesn't matter what you get. If you can't serve your fellow woman, your fellow man, it means nothing. And I would encourage each of you to also find a cause, something to serve. And not because you're going to get recognized for it, because a lot of times you won't get recognized. And then some of the people that you help may not appreciate it, they may not be grateful. But that's not why you're doing it. You're doing it because it keeps us human. And I'm very, very concerned about a lot of the things that I'm seeing happen in this world, especially in this country, that makes me not recognize the United States of America. And I'm speaking as a vet. My father flew the American flag every day until his death, because he felt like he had fought for the rights when he went to Germany right after World War II and served as a Korean-era vet, that he earned the right for all the rights that came along with being an American citizen. What makes us a rich and strong country is all the struggles that we've had up to this point. And for those people that would tell us that it's all for naught and are trying to change it and become a dictatorship, that the reason why this country was founded in the first place was to leave those kinds of things and not to come here and years later recreate it all over again. I think that America, it may not be the best country in the world, in terms of the way we've treated each other, but I think it's the best that we have. And as a result, those things that are good about us, that people have chosen to emulate for years and years and years, let's not forget them. Let's not get to a point where, because we see it on television, they say it over and over again and makes it true when it's not. Also remember to vote. I think if you don't go out and work for somebody or work for an organization or try to do service work, vote. That is what's going to keep us independent as a nation. But even here, there are forces that are fighting to pit us against each other. That's the only way we're going to fall as a nation, is when we're fighting each other, instead of banding together, becoming stronger, making sure that our children have a livable planet at least 7 generations to come. And I have found through my study of genealogy that race is a social construct. When I look at my DNA test, I have 4th cousins who are white. I actually brought someone to an event at Duke and I introduced them as my cousin, and everybody started to laugh because they didn't believe it. I told them they need to take their own DNA test. And we're going to find out that we're not, if just to look at someone and assume that they're one person, and you look at them, they're actually somebody else. I never expected to find Asian blood, Indonesian. I expected to find some European blood. I did find it. And one of the persons that I have become good friends with a family that reached out to me during the time I got the MacArthur Award. They called me and said, Catherine, we're getting in touch with you because our family, we think, is responsible for some of what is happening in Lowndes County. And they told me that they own one of their family, they didn't know it themselves, they found this out when they started looking into their family tree, that their family owned one of the largest slaves plantations in Lowndes County. They were teachers and social workers. So what they did, they came together. They didn't have a lot of money, but they put together a scholarship. That scholarship is now for students in Lowndes County to go to Tuskegee or to Wallace Community College. And they told me we wanted to name that scholarship for you. And the name of the scholarship is Coleman Flowers Scholars. Thank you. But this was a story of a black family and a white family that came together out of adversity. And we took something bad and made something good out of it. And I want to leave you with that. That no matter how bad things get, no matter how hard they seem and what they tell us on television and on talk radio and on social media, remember who you are, stay humble, and be faithful. Thank you.